If you're an INFJ who has ever felt rage building beneath a perfectly calm exterior, if people have no idea how close they've come to witnessing something they'd never forget, this video reveals the 7 signs that INFJ rage is about to explode. And here's what most people never understand. INFJs don't get angry despite how much they care. They get angry because of it. There's a particular kind of fury that lives inside the INFJ. It's not the explosive, table-flipping anger that announces itself immediately. It's not the petty irritation that flares and fades within minutes. This is something else entirely. Something that builds in layers, sometimes over months or even years, accumulating evidence and grievances in a psychological archive that most people don't even know exists. And when it finally surfaces, when the INFJ who has absorbed every slight, processed every disappointment, and given chance after chance, finally reaches the breaking point, it genuinely terrifies people. Not because INFJs become violent or cruel, but because the person standing in front of them suddenly seems like a stranger. The warmth is gone, the empathy has evaporated. And in its place is something cold, precise, and absolutely finished. If you've ever witnessed this transformation in yourself or in an INFJ, you know you understand exactly what I mean. And if you've been on the receiving end of it, you probably never saw it coming. That's precisely what makes INFJ rage so unsettling. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't build visibly like a storm on the horizon. It accumulates silently, invisibly, until suddenly everything changes. But here's what most people miss. There are signs. Subtle, easy to overlook, but absolutely consistent patterns that precede the explosion. And once you know what to look for, you'll never miss them again. The first sign is what I call the silence shift. INFJs are naturally contemplative. They process internally, they observe more than they speak, and comfortable silence doesn't bother them. But there's a difference between comfortable silence and this. This is a withdrawal of presence. An INFJ who was previously engaged, curious, asking questions, and offering observations, suddenly becomes quiet in a way that feels different. The warmth behind the silence has changed temperature. Imagine sitting across from someone at dinner. For months they've been present in the conversation, offering thoughts, making connections, and genuinely participating. Then one evening they're physically there but energetically absent. They respond when spoken to. They nod in the right places. But something has shifted. The questions have stopped. The elaborations have disappeared. They're no longer leaning into the conversation. They're tolerating it. This is not introversion. This is the first stage of emotional withdrawal. And it happens because the INFJ has begun processing something significant. They're no longer fully present, because part of their consciousness has turned inward, beginning to catalogue and analyze whatever has been building. Most people miss this sign entirely, because INFJs are already perceived as quiet, but the INFJ themselves know exactly what's happening. And if you're an INFJ watching this, you recognize the moment when your silence stops being peaceful and starts becoming protective. The second sign is detached politeness, and this is where it becomes genuinely unsettling. INFJs are naturally warm. Even when they're reserved, there's an underlying care in how they engage with people they value. Their politeness has texture to it. Emotional depth. But when rage begins building, something strange happens. The warmth drains out of their courtesy, and what remains is technically perfect but emotionally hollow. They still say please and tack on thank you. They still respond appropriately. But the responses feel scripted. Mechanical. Like they're following a social protocol, rather than genuinely engaging. Here's what makes this phenomenon so deeply strange. The INFJ isn't being rude. They're not snapping or being passive-aggressive in obvious ways. On the surface, their behavior is impeccable. But anyone with emotional intelligence can feel that something is wrong. The connection has been severed, and what remains is a performance of politeness that feels more disturbing than outright hostility would. An INFJ in this state might respond to your message with perfect grammar and appropriate content. Still, the usual warmth, the personal touch, the sense that they actually care about the exchange, is completely absent. They're communicating from behind glass. You can see them, hear them, but you cannot reach them. And most people find this profoundly disorienting because it doesn't give them anything to push back against. You can't argue with someone who's being perfectly polite. You can't address hostility that technically isn't there. All you can do is feel the distance growing and wonder what changed. The third sign, the analytical dissection, reveals why INFJs genuinely scare people when they care, and it's called, under normal circumstances, INFJs lead with intuition and feeling. They sense dynamics, read between the lines, and engage with emotional undercurrents. But when rage reaches a certain level, something shifts in how they process information. The intuition doesn't disappear. Instead, it becomes weaponized. Every observation they've ever made about you, every pattern they've noticed, every inconsistency they've filed away, suddenly becomes available for deployment. And here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. INFJs in this state can take you apart with surgical precision. They know your insecurities because they've been paying attention. They know the gap between who you pretend to be and who you actually are because they've been watching. They know exactly where to place words that will land with maximum impact because they understand you on a level you probably don't understand yourself. Most INFJs never deploy this capacity because it violates their core values. They don't want to hurt people. They don't enjoy psychological warfare. But when pushed far enough, when care has been betrayed enough times, when the patience has finally run out, they discover they have access to weapons they never wanted to use. And the people who witness this are genuinely shocked because it doesn't match their mental model of who the INFJ is. The gentle, empathetic person they thought they knew has been replaced by someone who can identify and articulate their deepest flaws with devastating accuracy. This is why INFJs scare people when they care. Because that care comes with a profound depth of understanding. Understanding can be used for healing or for harm. The INFJ who loves you knows you better than anyone. The INFJ who is done with you knows exactly how to make that hurt. The fourth sign, the withdrawal into tasks, is often mistaken for something else entirely. When an INFJ approaches the rage threshold, they often become incredibly productive. They throw themselves into work, into projects, into anything that provides a legitimate reason to be unavailable. On the surface, this looks like dedication, like focus, like someone who's simply busy with important things. But here's what's actually happening. They're building walls out of activity. Each task becomes a brick in a barrier they're constructing between themselves and whoever has triggered the building rage. This serves multiple purposes. It provides psychological distance without requiring confrontation. It gives them something to control when their emotional landscape feels chaotic. And critically, it provides a socially acceptable excuse for reduced engagement. They're not avoiding you, they're just swamped right now. The project deadline is approaching. The work has piled up. They'll be more available soon. Except they won't be, because the busyness isn't circumstantial, it's strategic. An INFJ in this state might take on extra responsibilities, specifically because those responsibilities provide cover for withdrawal. They might suddenly develop an intense interest in organizing, cleaning, creating, anything that occupies their hands and their surface-level attention, whilst their deeper mind processes what's really happening. If you know an INFJ who has become suspiciously productive whilst simultaneously becoming emotionally unavailable, you're watching someone build an escape route in real time. They're preparing the infrastructure for departure, whilst maintaining plausible deniability about their intentions. The fifth sign, the body's betrayal, manifests in the body before it manifests in words. Most people completely miss it. INFJs are remarkably good at controlling their facial expressions and their verbal responses. They've spent their entire lives managing how they present to others, often absorbing and masking their real feelings to maintain harmony. But the body keeps score. When rage is building, physical tells begin to appear even as the INFJ maintains their composed exterior. Their jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. Their breathing becomes shallower, their responses become shorter, not in a hostile way but in an efficient way. They're conserving energy, they're pulling resources inward. They're preparing for something, even if they haven't consciously acknowledged what that something is. Here's what makes this truly fascinating. The INFJ themselves might not recognize these signs in the moment. They're so accustomed to monitoring others' emotional states that they often neglect their own physical signals. They might spend days with tension in their shoulders, tightness in their chest, a vague sense of being unwell, without connecting it to the psychological pressure that's building. But the body knows. The body always knows. And the people around them, if they're paying attention, might notice that something seems off. The INFJ seems tired, seems stressed. Seems like they're carrying something heavy. They are. They're carrying the accumulated weight of every unprocessed grievance, every swallowed response, every time they chose peace over truth. And that weight is becoming unsustainable. The sixth sign is perhaps the most frightening for those who witness it, and is called the historical archive opening. INFJs have a remarkable memory for emotional events. Not just their own emotional experiences, but patterns of behavior they've observed in others over time. Under normal circumstances, this archive stays closed. They don't bring up old grievances, they don't track patterns explicitly, they process, they forgive, they move forward. But when rage reaches critical mass, something shifts. The archive opens, and suddenly, the INFJ has access to a comprehensive historical record that most people didn't know was being kept. Every promise that was broken. Every time their trust was betrayed. Every pattern of behavior that repeated, despite assurances that it would change. Every small moment that accumulated into this larger breaking point. All of it. Catalogued. Dated. Cross-referenced with context and impact. When an INFJ in this state finally speaks, they don't just address the current issue, they reveal the entire pattern. They connect incidents that occurred months or years apart into a coherent narrative of disappointment. They demonstrate, with specific examples, that this isn't about one thing. This is about everything. And here's why this terrifies people. Most of us don't expect to be held accountable to such comprehensive records. We assume that old conflicts are resolved and forgotten. We believe that because something wasn't mentioned, it wasn't noticed. We're wrong. The INFJ noticed everything. They just chose, repeatedly, to give grace instead of keeping score. Until they stop choosing that. When the archive opens, people discover that the INFJ they thought had forgiven them actually has perfect recall of every transgression. And hearing all of it laid out, connected, and undeniable is often devastating. Not because the INFJ is exaggerating or being unfair, but because they're being completely comprehensively accurate. And accuracy, when it reveals patterns we'd rather not see, can be harder to hear than any insult. The seventh sign is the most subtle and the most significant. And it's what precedes the actual explosion. I call it the eerie calm. After all the previous signs have manifested, after the silence, the detachment, the withdrawal and the physical tension, there often comes a strange period of stillness. The INFJ seems almost peaceful, almost resigned. The agitation that was visible in earlier stages seems to have settled into something quieter. This is not resolution. This is the eye of the storm. What's actually happened is that the INFJ has finished processing. They've moved through the stages of hoping things would change, of trying to manage their reactions, of questioning whether they're being reasonable. They've arrived at a conclusion. and that conclusion has brought a certain clarity that reads as calm. In this state, the INFJ has often already made their decision. They know what they're going to do. They know what they're going to say. They may have already mentally rehearsed the conversation, the confrontation, the departure. The uncertainty is over. The internal debate has concluded. What remains is simply the execution. People often mistake this calm for improvement. They think the INFJ has gotten over whatever was bothering them. They believe the storm has passed. They're catastrophically wrong. The storm hasn't passed. It has organized itself, it has become focused, and it is about to make landfall with precision that the scattered earlier signs never suggested was coming. This is the moment before the INFJ says something they've never said before, before they draw a boundary they've never drawn, before they walk away from something or someone they've been enduring for longer than anyone realized. The calm is not peace, the calm is preparation. And what follows it will change everything. Here's what connects all 7 of these signs, and why understanding them matters whether you're an INFJ or someone who cares about one. INFJ rage doesn't come from nowhere. It's not random, irrational, or disproportionate, even when it feels that way to people who witness it. It's the inevitable result of a particular way of engaging with the world. INFJs absorb, they process, they give chances, they believe in potential, they extend grace, they choose peace. Over and over again, they make choices that prioritize harmony and connection over their own immediate needs. And for a long time this works. The relationships function. The situations remain manageable. The INFJ's ability to regulate, to adapt, to accommodate, seems limitless. But it isn't infinite. There is a threshold. A point where the absorption capacity is exceeded, where the processing can't keep pace with the input, where the grace account has been overdrawn too many times. And when that threshold is crossed, everything that was held changes form. The very qualities that made the INFJ so accommodating become the qualities that make their rage so significant. Their deep understanding becomes surgical insight. Their careful observation becomes comprehensive memory. Their desire for authentic connection becomes absolute intolerance for superficial reconciliation. The depth that made them capable of profound love makes them capable of profound disappointment. The care that made them patient makes them devastating when patience ends. This is why INFJs scare people when they care. Not because they're dangerous in any physical sense, not because they're cruel or vindictive by nature, but because when an INFJ finally reaches the point of expressing rage, it comes with the full weight of everything they understood, everything they tolerated, everything they hoped would be different. It comes from someone who genuinely believed in you, who saw your potential, who gave you more chances than you probably deserved. And when that person is finally done, the loss isn't just of their presence, it's their belief, their investment, their willingness to see you as more than what you've shown yourself to be. That's what people feel when INFJ rage finally surfaces. They feel the withdrawal of something they didn't even know they were receiving. And they discover, often too late, that the gentle person who seemed infinitely tolerant was actually tracking everything, feeling everything, processing everything. Just quietly, privately, until they weren't. If you're an INFJ watching this, I want you to understand something important. Your rage is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It's evidence that something was wrong with the situation. The guilt that often follows INFJ anger, the questioning of whether you overreacted, whether you should have been more patient, and whether you're being too harsh, needs to be examined carefully. Because INFJs are far more likely to underreact than overreact. You're far more likely to have tolerated too much for too long than to have exploded prematurely. The very fact that you reached this point means that something genuinely significant occurred. Probably many significant things, accumulating over time, exceeded the threshold that should have been respected long before. Your rage, when it comes, is often the first time you've actually advocated for yourself after countless occasions of advocating for others. And whilst I'm not suggesting that rage should be the goal, or that explosive conflict is healthy, I am suggesting that the anger itself is valid. It's information. It's telling you that a boundary was crossed, a trust was betrayed, a pattern was ignored. And you're allowed to feel that. You're allowed to act on it. You're allowed to protect yourself with the same ferocity you've been protecting everyone else. The transformation that scares people isn't a loss of control. It's a reclamation of it. The INFJ who finally expresses rage is an INFJ who has finally stopped prioritizing everyone else's comfort over their own reality. And yes, that's startling to witness. Yes, it changes how people see you. But the alternative, continuing to absorb, continuing to accommodate, continuing to betray yourself in service of peace, that's not sustainable, and it shouldn't be expected. If you recognized yourself in these 7 signs, if you felt the silence shift, and the detachment settle, and the calm before something you couldn't stop, I want to know which one hit the hardest. Which sign made you realize that this isn't just anger, it's the accumulated weight of everything you chose not to say? Tell me in the comments. And if this helped you understand something about yourself or about an INFJ in your life, subscribe. We explore these depths regularly, and there's a community here of people who understand what it means to feel everything deeply, and to have that depth finally find its voice. You're not too much. You never were. You were just waiting for a space that could hold all of you. This is that space.